Meditation is not a quiet escape from reality. It is a deliberate encounter with it. The first time you sit and watch your breath, you realize how loud your life actually is. This moment is both gentle and violent, like being made to meet yourself under harsh light. In this video, we will travel through traditions and ideas that made meditation a philosophical practice. We will trace how stillness became a laboratory of wisdom rather than a retreat from responsibility. Different traditions give meditation different purposes, and those purposes reveal deep cultural questions about the self. In Buddhism, meditation seeks liberation from suffering through insight into impermanence and non-self, while the Christian Desert Fathers used prayerful silence to seek communion with the divine. Each tradition asks what matters most and fashions contemplative methods as answers to those existential questions. Understanding these divergent purposes helps us see meditation as a philosophy in practice, rather than a mere technique. When the goal is enlightenment, compassion, or union with God, the practice is shaped to remodel attention, ethics, and identity simultaneously. In Stoicism, meditation was a reflective rehearsal of virtue rather than a mystical ascent into nothingness. Stoic practices asked people to imagine hardships, to rehearse death, and to examine judgments before acting, turning contemplation into ethical training. This shows how meditation can be an exercise in moral imagination and disciplined attention to right conduct. Sufi meditation emphasized presence with God and the heart's purification through repetition, music, and surrender. These different aims show meditation's elasticity, and they force us to ask what kind of transformation we actually want from practice. Across Asia, meditation practices diverge between concentration, insight, and devotional styles with very different philosophical scaffolding. Concentration tames the mind through focused attention. Insight probes into the nature of experience, and devotional practices dissolve the subject into love or surrender. Each method implies a theory of mind and a proposed cure for human confusion. When we examine these scaffolds, we discover implicit metaphysics and ethics underlying each practice, and those philosophical foundations are the real map for transformation. Meditation is therefore not neutral. It carries assumptions about what we are and what we must become. Cultivating awareness is the core claim that unites most contemplative traditions, despite their differences. Awareness here is more than attention. It is a reflective stance that allows experience to disclose itself without reactive distortion. Through sustained practice, awareness becomes both a tool and a moral sensor that reveals habitual patterns and momentary choices. Neuroscience names this skill in terms of attention networks and metacognition, but the lived description remains evocative and precise. Awareness lets you see what you are doing as you do it. That capacity changes how choices are made and how suffering is handled in everyday life. Meditation trains the mind to notice thought processes instead of being swept away by them, and that simple shift is revolutionary. When you start observing your thoughts, you realize most decisions are autopilot, driven by habit and old narratives that no longer serve you. This recognition is the first philosophical step toward freedom, because it exposes the machinery behind belief and action. The practice also cultivates compassionate attention, allowing difficult emotions to arise without catastrophic identification. Over time, your responses become less reflexive and more chosen, which reshapes relationships and moral responsibility alike. Philosophy and meditation have always been intertwined, though they speak in different languages about the same problems. Philosophy analyzes arguments about truth, ethics, and selfhood, while meditation offers a lived experiment that tests those concepts in felt experience. When combined, conceptual reasoning and contemplative practice form a feedback loop that deepens both intellectual clarity and existential insight. This relationship challenges modern assumptions that thought and feeling are separate domains, showing instead that wisdom can be cultivated by turning critical questioning inward. Meditation becomes a method of inquiry that philosophers might call phenomenological, because it examines experience from the inside out. Epistemologically, meditation offers a mode of knowing that is first person and experimentally verified. The knower becomes the laboratory, and introspective rigor becomes a valid way of testing claims about mind and reality. This creates philosophical tensions with purely third-person scientific methodology. But it also creates new avenues for integrating insight with evidence. Ethically, contemplative practice shapes character by disciplining attention and fostering virtues like patience, courage, and compassion. These changes are not just personal but social, because transformed individuals change their relationships and institutions in subtle but powerful ways. There are many types of meditation, and understanding the differences helps match practice to purpose. Focused attention practices cultivate steadiness by returning the mind to a single object like breath, a candle flame, or a mantra until distraction loses its power. Open monitoring practices, by contrast, cultivate spaciousness by watching experience unfold without grasping or aversion. Other practices include loving kindness meditation, which trains the heart toward benevolence, and analytical meditation, which investigates models of self and reality through guided reflection. Movement practices such as yoga or walking meditation integrate body and mind, proving that stillness can be found while in motion. Concentration practices are like building a muscle for attention, and they produce immediate benefits in clarity and focus. If your mind is a storm, concentration builds a lighthouse that offers a stable reference point during turbulence. Many people find this practice practical for work, learning, and calming stress because it strengthens sustained attention in everyday contexts. Insight practices are less about stability and more about discovering structural truths about experience, such as impermanence and selfless processes. These practices can be unsettling at first because they confront deeply held identities and assumptions. But they also open a pathway to lasting liberation from repetitive suffering. Mantra and devotional practices use sound and repetition to reorient attention and cultivate intimacy with a chosen ideal. Repetition modifies the rhythm of the mind and reconfigures meaning by creating associative networks that favor calm and devotion. These practices often involve community and ritual, which means their effects are amplified by shared intention and cultural framing. Koan practice in Zen introduces paradoxical questions that dismantle habitual conceptual thinking, forcing a direct encounter with reality beyond words. This brutal method bypasses reasoning by challenging the mind's comfort with easy answers, and it can catalyze sudden shifts in understanding when practiced with patience and guidance. Developing a meditation practice is less about intensity and more about consistency across time. Small habitual investments may daily accumulate into profound transformation because attention evolves slowly through repetition and gentle correction. Beginners should therefore prioritize a schedule and environment that make practice inevitable rather than heroic. A simple start is 5 to 10 minutes of sitting each morning, which creates an anchor of awareness that can be carried into the day. The cumulative effect of these small acts becomes visible after months, altering reactivity and clarifying values in ways that elude quick fix solutions. Posture and breath are practical scaffolding rather than mystical prerequisites, and small adjustments can make the practice sustainable. A comfortable, upright posture supports alertness and reduces physical distraction, while the breath offers the most accessible object of attention for beginners. Knowing that physical discomfort can be managed with simple adjustments removes a common barrier for people starting meditation. Equally important is learning to handle distraction without judgment, because attention grows through compassionate redirection rather than harsh self-criticism. Encouraging a beginner's mindset makes failures instructive instead of discouraging, turning each distraction into a data point for skillful correction. Meditation as a path to self-knowledge requires bravery because it reveals what you avoid looking at most. The quiet reveals emotional patterns, unconscious narratives, and defensive strategies that structure your life without your consent. When these patterns are seen, they lose tyrannical power. But the moment of seeing often feels like loss before it becomes liberation. This process is philosophical because it interrogates identity, agency, and authenticity in lived experience rather than abstract speculation. The contemplative path asks not, "What should I believe?" but "Who is doing the believing?" And that inquiry can shift the axis of a life. Shadow work is an essential component of deep meditation because unexamined impulses operate beneath conscious awareness. Bringing these shadows to light requires patience and non-judgmental curiosity, and the practice reshapes ethical behavior by making impulses transparent and negotiable. This honesty is the very foundation of moral development because it transforms reactive patterns into considered responses. Meditation, therefore, becomes a moral training ground where you practice choosing rather than compulsively acting, which aligns closely with philosophical ideals of autonomy. As autonomy increases, so does the responsibility to act with clarity and compassion, rather than from reactivity or habit. Many seekers hope meditation will produce an instant revelation, but the truth is typically slower and messier than myth. Progress is uneven because attention, habit, and conditioning interact in complicated ways that differ between people. Expecting constant optimism sets up disappointment, while steady curiosity sustains a practice through inevitable plateaus and setbacks. The frame of a lifetime, rather than a quick fix, invites patience, and reframing progress as learning rather than achievement reduces discouragement. This long perspective connects meditation to philosophical virtues like temperance and courage, which are developed through habitual acts over years. Practical guidance for beginners is straightforward, but requires discipline and kindness combined. Start with 5 minutes of sitting each day and gradually extend the length as comfort increases over weeks. Pair this practice with journaling to record shifts in perception and to translate subtle changes into explicit learning. Using guided meditations or classes can reduce early confusion and accelerate habit formation, because an external voice scaffolds attention when the mind is inexperienced. A teacher or community also provides compassionate accountability, perspective, and a corrective presence during confusing or challenging phases. Technology can be a helpful ally if used wisely, but it can also replace the loneliness that cultivative practice needs. Apps offer structure, reminders, and accessible guided sessions that lower the barrier to entry for many people. However, relying solely on apps without cultivating inward discipline risks creating dependency on external prompts rather than inner resolve. Balance is the key, and alternating guided practice with silent sessions helps develop both attention and autonomy. Smart use of technology amplifies, rather than replaces, the actual work of sitting and watching. Common obstacles include boredom, sleepiness, and the illusion of not having time, and each obstacle teaches a lesson if attended to candidly. Boredom often indicates that habitual craving still runs your attention, and sleeping reveals exhausted nervous systems that need rest before deep practice. The sense of having no time usually reflects priorities rather than real scarcity, and reshaping those priorities is part of the ethical work of practice. Approach obstacles with curiosity and small adaptive adjustments rather than punitive willpower, because kindness sustains practice. These everyday negotiations are the real laboratory of transformation, not dramatic breakthroughs alone. Meditation also intersects with modern psychology in clinically useful ways, and this bridge makes contemplative practices accessible and evidence-based. Therapies like mindfulness-based stress reduction and acceptance and commitment therapy borrow contemplative techniques to treat anxiety and depression effectively. This scientific validation does not exhaust the practice's philosophical depth, but it helps translate ancient disciplines into contemporary therapeutic tools. Knowing that there is empirical support reduces skepticism and encourages systematic practice, while philosophical reflection preserves the deeper aims of transformation together. Science and philosophy can create a richer map for understanding what meditation actually does to mind and society. Community accelerates growth because contemplation becomes charged with shared ethical intention when practiced collectively. Sanghas, meditation groups, and spiritual communities provide models of disciplined attention and compassion that are hard to replicate alone. Shared adversity and mutual encouragement make perseverance more likely and insights more integrated into daily behavior. Yet the novice must remain discerning because communities can ossify into dogma if reflection stops and identity takes over. Healthy groups encourage interrogation and support individual inquiry rather than enforcing uniformity of belief. Teachers can offer shortcuts through dense practice terrain, providing personalized guidance and contextual wisdom that books and apps cannot deliver. A skilled teacher points out blind spots and offers methods tailored to temperament, which can prevent wasted time or misguided effort. Teachers also embody the practice in ways that make the abstract feel alive and trustworthy. However, the right teacher is discerned by the student's judgment and ethical intuition, and not every charismatic guide serves the student's highest welfare. Healthy relationships with teachers are accountable, transparent, and rooted in mutual respect rather than absolute authority. Meditation's payoff is not a tidy set of skills, but an altered relationship to experience that bears philosophical consequences. You begin to see that many problems are not solved by external change alone, because internal orientation shapes how external circumstances are interpreted. This shift turns meditation into a form of political and social action because inner transformation changes how one engages power, justice, and community. In other words, contemplative practice is not private escapism, but a public resource for clearer perception and more ethical agency. As attention becomes disciplined, choices become less reactive and more aligned with considered values. Philosophically, meditation invites a paradox. The more you look, the less fixed the self appears to be. This destabilization can be disorienting, but it also frees you from narratives that cause suffering and narrow possibility. Once identity becomes flexible, the world becomes richer and relationships gain intimacy, unfettered by defensive stories. This paradox is the modern relevance of ancient teachings. Freedom is not obtained by adding things, but by subtracting mistaken attachments. The contemplative life thus reframes progress as liberation from illusions rather than accumulation. If you want to start today, commit to kindness and curiosity rather than dramatic goals that attract stress. Begin with 5 minutes a day, keep a simple log, and find a guide or group to stay accountable and inspired. Notice shifts in patience, relationships, and decision-making over months rather than expecting instant revolution. Finally, integrate small practices into daily life by pausing before stressful emails, breathing deliberately before conversations, and returning to presence in mundane tasks. These micro-practices become the bridge between formal meditation and a life lived with intention. Meditation is a philosophical technology that reshapes experience through disciplined attention and ethical intention. It is not a cure-all nor an escape, but a method of clarifying perception and aligning action with considered values. This combination makes meditation one of the most consequential practices available for personal and social transformation in any era. If this perspective gave you a new way to think about meditation, try a 5-minute practice right now and observe what changes. If this video gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe and join us for more explorations into the art of thinking and living well.